Welcome. I'm Eleanor Silverstein, and today I'm here with my very good friend, Anastasi Siotas. And Anastasi, this talk is about talking about you, Anastasi, the amazing human being, scientist, brilliant mover, choreographer, and oceanographer, and working with marine biology, all of your history, all of your background of what has drawn you into this work and how you're teaching and creating and teaching with movement and anatomy and all of this. So there's the big sphere. Talk to us about this.
That's a really big sphere, but like all spheres, that can expand, like cells that pulsate, that respire, that eject particles and draw them in order to have energy to continue. Yeah, it's like a big sphere, and in a way, my life and coming into Feldenkrais um, is informed by a lot of different fields. I didn't come into the work until my early 30s, and prior to that, yes, I was a marine plant cell biologist. That was my research field, looking at how cells recognize each other in the ocean and how they settle and form a calcium skeleton that then the Great Barrier Reef in Australia would actually form on. So that was my early research work. And then I was always moving and dancing as a child. And then that became a bit of an escape from science because I wasn't sure I wanted to be a scientist. And then that led me into my second career, which was modern dance and choreography and directing. And then during that time, I encountered that Feldenkrais word many times. And then through my own exploration and injuries and recovering from injuries, I came to study the work and realized that after that first career as a scientist and then the second career as an artist, that in the Feldenkrais method, these two things came together. And so for me, I think it's a synthesis. It's a coming together of an understanding of movement, biology, evolution, and looking at the creative process and expression and all of those other elements that movement can so finely describe in ways that words are not quite adequate enough to truly encapsulate the experience that one has. And so, yes, coming into the work, I found it incredibly inspiring because at that time in my dance world, I wasn't so interested in people mirroring what I was doing as a mover. I was more interested in them finding their own innate patterns and their own ways of expressing themselves. Very much a postmodern idea in the theater world that I felt like the method went even further, went even deeper into the underlying patterns of nature and the education that we have and how we're influenced by culture and biology and development, how it all comes together so significantly to create who we are. In fact, the last big theater piece I did was called Telling, The Way I Move is the Story of My Life. And so in a way, the way you move does tell of your entire history. And I think the work in a way helps a person dive deeply into their own learning and the understanding about patterns of action and how their habituation is necessary, but at the same time could be the limitation for us. I just found the work profound.
So you said something that I just want to pause with for a moment, is that your dance was showing movement that showed the history, the story of your whole life. And then you said, because our movement does show the story of our whole life, right? I mean, that's huge because, and that's what we explore in Feldenkrais, right?
Absolutely. And we can attribute that the higher degrees of control and complex movement is actually sort of matching the path of our maturation. Like that as we have greater understanding of ourselves and how we move and how to move in ways that are more efficient, less injurious, that give us the capacity to be more comfortable in the field of gravity, it's and more efficient in the field of gravity, we discover that we can do better with ourselves in every way, in our physical manifestation, which affects, of course, our emotional landscape, as well as our thought processes, and then, you know, what we're actually thinking about as we're doing things. So I think that adage of Moshe's, of the idea of thinking, sensing, and feeling and doing, you know, it's to me, it was like, oh yeah, I had studied dance therapy, I had looked at different things, but in a way, unpacking it down to the minutia of how do I fold, how do I reach, how do I, you know, these basic functions of life broken down not for aesthetic purposes, but for the sense of completeness, comfort, ease, you know, a way different thing to what happens on stage. You know, performance is about showing someone something, but when you're just moving for yourself, you can refine what you're doing in such a way that you can be comfortable in your skin for a much greater period of time. I don't know how else to put it, but you know, gravity's going to win. We're going to go down at some point, and we want to be able to function as well as we can in this field of gravity in ways that don't hurt us, and help us maintain length and feel comfortable and graceful, actually, and beautiful in the way we move. And that's been one of the, I guess, one of the attractions for me in the work, because I don't think in dancing I was working necessarily so efficiently. The object of expression was, you know, overrode my own internal sense of what was right or wrong. I mean, I did things in performance that I now think are insane. Oh, why would I do that? Why would I let someone be jumping on my back or doing things to the extreme for the showmanship of it, as opposed to, why don't I move in ways that are less about showing off something as opposed to feeling really good about how I'm moving. I don't
But
know.
you
I'm
know what's
explaining that.
interesting? You brought up earlier about, it's like going back to you brought up the complexity of movement, right? As showing maturation as we grow. And in the Feldenkrais method, sometimes we go back to the very beginning movements to help us understand our own self inside, and then we can grow again in another way. And I saw a performance of you once in New Hampshire in which you spent beautiful time on the floor, and this movement was, well, amoeba like. It was crawling, creeping, and then coming up and spiraling up, sometimes jumping up and then going back down to the floor. And, you know, when I think of that biologically, when I think of that physiologically, when I think of that growing older on this earth and getting comfortable with our movement coming with gravity back to the floor, that when gravity wins, it doesn't have to be such a ugly thing on us, because we can come back to the floor with more ease, right? Like you always shown in your dances, and you have fallen in your life. I've fallen, everyone, fall happens, right? But it's that way that we're using ourselves as we're in the middle of being aware, right? And that's so much of this work too.
Exactly. I'm now, what you're describing, I'm thinking of this idea that we want forces to travel through our system rather than get trapped and cause injury. So yes, spiraling is a very organic and dynamic action that can help you dissipate forces through the system and actually let them travel through you. So spiraling into rolling, and then using that energy to actually come back out of rolling into spiraling back up, defying gravity or resisting. I don't want to say resisting. I actually think we can ride gravity, and it's not that it's our skeletal system that's essentially giving us the ability to lift and get and move away from the ground. But it's not that the skeletal system is the only element there. It's all about how the soft tissues, our ligaments, tendons, and muscles, which are the engines of movement, but all those connections, all that soft tissue, the fascia, everything is working together with our crystallized fascia, which is our bone. Our bone starts off as cartilage that crystallizes. So it also maintains that flexibility. So the whole system is, if you can refine it in such a way that you're allowing energy to pass through the system, then I think you're less likely to have those injuries. But then again, you can have a situation. I remember I was teaching in Boston once, and there was black ice, and there was no way that I could break that fall into a spiral. It was so accelerated so quickly that there was an impact, and it took some time to recover from it. But the fact that can happen to you, so things can happen. We do have falls that we can't control, and yet in that fall, I know that it could have been much worse if I hadn't realized that I could turn, even though it was so fast that my foot slid out from under me. I actually turned enough that I landed more on the back of my shoulder blade, which I maybe wouldn't have done. Maybe I would have put my hand out and then
break.
Done worse. Yeah. So,
but then we can talk about what happens. So sometimes in life there is black ice, right? And there's a fly through the air, and maybe you did do that rotation that stopped from, you did something, or you were just unlucky or unlucky. But we can talk about what happens in our movement of ourself post fall, because that's where what you were just talking about earlier comes into play here.
Right. Well, I think this idea of, we have only a certain amount of consciousness regarding what we're actually doing most of the time. I think a lot of things that we learn, they become unconscious. Like, you don't think about the choreography of tying a bow, for example. You learn to tie a bow, you tie a lace, and you commit that becomes part of your memory. It's not that it's not conscious, but you could almost do it without thinking about it. You could almost be thinking about something else and still do that. So I think this notion that with every single lesson that we do, every awareness through movement lesson, every functional integration lesson we receive, that somewhere in that what is generated in our cells of our brain, what we nest in our behavior because we've enacted this pattern of action, you may not be thinking about it, but it's there and it's accessible in the right moment if you can call upon it. And if you've done it enough times and you've done enough nuances and variety, you suddenly discover you have incredible resources that may not be called forth until a circumstance requires it. But that's where I think the work is, like our wonderful teacher Ruthie Alon used to say, it's like money in the bank. Like every lesson you do, you're banking something, you're putting something away that could be used for yourself in the future. I think that's an amazing concept. And I think that it's the basis of what's happening and what we're doing and why we call this education and not therapy, because we're learning constantly from each pattern of action that we're enacting, and we're refining it for ourselves. And I want to say one thing about maybe one of the things that I've become enamored of in maybe the last 15 or so years, and that is teaching awareness through movement lessons where the student is largely following their preference. Like, I might not put them, I might not say right or left. I might say, work with the side that feels easy for you to begin the lesson. And I'm often teaching preferred side lessons because I think they're another entry point. It's another way of following your own pattern so that you can use that to lead toward the exploration of the pattern, which is not so familiar to you. Yeah, so that, I know that our wonderful, now departed Dennis Leary taught many lessons in that way, and I was very enamored of that. And I use that a lot in my awareness through movement teaching. And of course, we're all doing that in one way, shape, or form in our functional integration lessons. Even if we're teaching a leading lesson as opposed to a following lesson. This is for Feldenkrais teachers. I apologize if you don't follow this train of thought, but in our functional integration lessons, we usually discover what it is the person's conscious or unconscious pattern, what's latent, what's there, that's easily accessible to them. And we usually join them in that way so that we're agreeing with the system often before we're leading them toward the other possibility that their system is, nervous system, functional system is willing to accept and utilize in their functional life. So it's an underlying concept, the idea of following and then going from following to leading. Hope that makes some sense.
Actually, I think a few years ago, you were here in my home and you gave a lesson to my beloved husband who insists, he's bone on one of his knees and the leg is all the way severely bowed out. And he walks, like this. So it's not just side to side, but it's a complete fall on the right side, like as many people do as they get older. And we all know in our world where that leads. And I watched you give him a beautiful lesson in this way of following and leading. I believe that's what you were doing. And my husband, who insists he walks that way because he's bone on bone and there is no other way to walk, he went several months for the first time in his adult life since we have been married in 37 years and just walked like this. He didn't do that. So now it's a few years later and he's back to that. And he goes back in his mind to, well, it's because I'm bone on bone. And I go, would you like me to pull out the video I took of Anastasi I filmed Anastasi giving you the lesson, because remember that. And that's enough for him to all of a sudden make that personal shift in that walk for someone who I call a possum that just kind of does the same thing as he keeps crossing the road, So it's nothing short of, in a way, miraculous in the simplicity and how you approach it. You personally approach before you touch someone with all your history background in how you're looking at a person. And then you make something look so simple and you make miracles for people.
Well, thank you, Eleanor. I'm very touched by the notion that your husband could just look at that video and it would be enough to remind him of something that's actually there, and that he, it's great because it flies in the face of the other belief system that he has, which is, I'm bone on bone. And let me just say a little about bone on bone. Yes, this is a possibility, but you're bone on bone in one joint, or your belief system can be about that bone on bone situation because there is actual pain that makes you feel that that's what the situation is. But here's the thing. There are at least 250 or more other synovial joints in your system, which if you can improve all of those and their ability to glide and float and have the freedom of joint play that could be potential there, then that one joint that's supposedly bone on bone suddenly doesn't suffer in the same way, because the distribution of work, the distribution of articulation throughout the system is now changed. And once you just change one or two other areas and the whole system reorganizes itself. So I think what's beautiful about what you said here is that, this man can look at how he was after that lesson, and it can be enough to remind him that all he probably does is shift weight a little bit into a different organization, and there it is. He has it again. It maybe needs because everything does need some repetition and some reminding.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think it's really cool that happens, and I'll say that this happens too for many people when you just remind yourself of the sensation you had at the end
Yeah.
of a lesson. Like
Yeah.
I know lessons, I remember our dear departed Joan Fitz and my giving me a lesson and my leaving the office feeling like my clavicles were completely level and just extended way beyond the edges of my shoulders. And I just think about that line, and it's almost like ideokinesis. I just think about a line in shape in space, and suddenly my whole system I'm thinking about it now, and my head has come
Yeah.
back,
I just went
instead
up.
of the
From your description, I get it.
yeah. So it's incredible how simple it can be. You just have to remind yourself of a sensation that you've lived in. You've actually walked around and inhabited your own self in that way, and it's there. It's amazing. I mean, yeah, it's amazing. You can call on it. So I think that's what your husband was doing, and that's very exciting to hear that. So
Yeah. Wow. And oh my goodness, I'm wordless in this because I think that this is a good place to let people sit and think about it, right? And resonate with it, because it's all of us. We're making friends with our body, we're making friends with gravity. We're thinking of if we have a problem with a joint, whether it's in the ankle, the knee, the hip, right? We can work with synovial joints anywhere because they're systems, and we're working systems. We're improving the whole biological system. And I can say that to you as a biologist to a biologist, right? We get that. And
yeah, like if I tweak something here, maybe this thing's going to not open in an ordinary way. But if I
right.
can reorganize that and reconfigure it, then maybe the entire thing starts to. I mean, it's just like this, really. Our entire osteofascial, myofascial, whatever you want to think about it, everything that moves you, it all comes from this one layer, one embryonic layer,
Oh,
and
thank you for saying that. Yep.
this whole idea of the mesoderm layer, which
Yep.
forms your
Yep.
skeleton, it forms your heart, it forms your kidneys, the filtering organs. These all come from this one layer of tissue, and from that differentiation of that layer of tissue, you do develop, your bone, your muscles, but it's just one layer. It's not the same layer that produces your skin and your hair, and it's not the same
Another,
layer that
that's
produces
another
the
layer,
other organs.
right? It's
Yeah,
mesoderm, endoderm, ectoderm, and it's things that you and I get excited about, and we spread out into our universe of our classes and to the people who come to our classes, because again, that's helps people to really understand why it's not magical in that way, that you can work on one part and it makes an improvement on everything, including your eyesight, or your heart rate becoming more calm and going into parasympathetic nervous system. And I mean, this work, this whole body of work allows for all of that.
yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I feel that, this new area of anatomy that I've sort of been exposed to since 2014, the field of biotensegrity, this notion that we're not the man machine that
Yeah,
unfortunately has been perpetuated since the
right.
1800s. Um, we are really a biological system, and there are many ways that you can alter the system. Why does the artificial floor work? Why does the putting a board on someone's foot, stimulating different parts of the foot, waking up sensory input to various parts of the foot, have this profound effect on how one then stands and organizes their head on top of that the important part of yourself that you stand on the ground with when you're standing on 2 feet. I mean, this notion of a biological system, and that you can make one change in one place and how it ripples out to the rest of the system is just a profound example of our biological nature. And when we go and start thinking about our dysfunctional parts, and we go and have a lesson with someone, and they're not working at all at that part that's supposedly, you know, having the issue, and yet the response is, wow, you feel completely changed and much more able and much more functional. And you didn't know it because your whole mindset was drawn to that place that was having the issue. And now all of a sudden, the issue is more in the background because you're able to continue to function. This is a profound example of the systemic nature of our biological system, and that one change in one place has a universal effect on all other places. And not just our physical nature, but the way we think, the way we feel, our emotional state, our what the thoughts we're having. You know, we might think doom and gloom. I just finished working with someone who's had a serious motorcycle accident and has now 4 months out and has many screws and plates in her leg. And you know, we finished the lesson, and she just said, yes, I know I still can't walk on this leg, but I feel like I'm so much more upright and I can see the world. And you know, she talked about the emotional component, which was like, I felt like I will never be able to improve. And now I've improved. And you didn't do anything. You didn't do what I mean, I don't know what her physical therapist is doing, but they're doing a lot of strong work with her because I think they're afraid that her knee will have contractures. So they're trying to push it into greater ranges of flexion. But, you know, I had her doing stuff where you're holding the foot like we do, holding the big toe and moving the leg and rolling. She was rolling all over. She's like, oh, this is so much more fun. I mean, she couldn't do necessarily more with her knee than she did at the beginning, but in the end, the entire rest of her system had shifted so much that the issue at her knee had receded, and she felt optimistic about that this is gonna work out, you know. So
I think Ruthie Along called that family therapy, right? In a way. So, well, Anastasi, we could talk forever on all these subjects, as we already have over all these years. So I'm so happy to just share this coffee time or drinking your glass of water time, and, you know, getting to sit and listen to the brilliance of what Anastasi Siotas offers and teaches, and your background and how you apply it and your way of thinking and sharing with us. You're always sharing. Thank you.
well, thank you, Eleanor. It's an honor to share this work. I truly believe it is, you know, it's my life's work to continue the legacy of what Dr. Feldenkrais left us, and there's so many teachers who have been an influence on me in my growth and education in this work. And as Dr. Feldenkrais said, we all must grow into our own beautiful version of this work. As Ruthie said, you know, we're like the silk moth. You know, we're having the mulberry leaf, but we're producing silk. In a way, we all receive this incredible training in this amazing method, and then we each create our own version, our own handwriting of this work. And I think that our history has to come to the fore, and we must express who we are from our origins to how the work has influenced us, and then how we take that and share it with people that can benefit in their own comfort, and then they want to share it with people. So I think that's a very exciting thing. It's an honor to be able to share this work. So thank you for inviting me to talk a little about my very diverse background.
Very diverse, and it all weaves together. Thank you so much, Anastasi. I'm looking forward to you presenting, as always, at our upcoming Feldenkrais Guild of North America annual conference that is going to be September 10th, 11th, and 12th. Thank you.
Thank you.